now part of Connecticut's Freedom Trail, so it's wonderful. I have a number of people I'd just like to introduce, and some will be speaking. First of all, I'd like to extend a welcome to Al Marder for all the work he's done in getting us this far. Al, thank you very much. And Kit Bershner with the State Tourism Group, thank you for coming down and supporting this event. As well as Diane McCann, who's a local historian, has done a wonderful job, not only with non-Lyman history, but also the Lyman history itself. So thank you, Diane. And Mr. John Brayshaw, the first selection of Middlefield. John, thanks for coming. And last but not least, some of the members of the Lyman family that are in attendance today. John Lyman III, who you all know, I think, as well as Jack Lyman, as well as, we have a ninth generation here, and I'm going in order of visuals. Luke Patterson, ninth generation, Peter Smith, and Scott Gamber. So thank you guys for coming. So if I do my job correctly, I think I'm supposed to ask Al to come up here and speak for a few minutes. Would you like to do that, Al?
Thank you, Larry. Actually, we had invited Dr. Harris, Catherine Harris, from the Connecticut Central State University to speak. And obviously, I think they're lost somewhere. Well, first of all, this is a wonderful occasion. It's a wonderful occasion for the Connecticut Freedom Trail, and it's a wonderful occasion for the state of Connecticut. I am the president of the Amistad Committee. And as we began to investigate the Amistad story and in our attempt to bring that first human rights case in the United States history to the American people, we realized then that there were many stories to be told in Connecticut. So while this perhaps was the most dramatic story, a story that would change the course of U.S. history, for the first time bringing black and white together and initiating the abolitionist movement, which sadly, whose lessons were not learned as a result of the victory of those Sierra Leone captives, but had ended it in a civil war, which finally had to determine the end of slavery. So we realized a few years into the Amistad story that there were many stories to be told. And so we lobbied the State Assembly and said there must be a freedom trail where people could look at the sites of those black and white in our country, in our state, and see how our history was really fashioned. What contributions these people made through the many years in this struggle. And finally, after several years, they voted to establish the Connecticut Freedom Trail. And in their wisdom, they assigned the Amistad Committee the responsibility for coordinating. But I'm going to end right here because Dr. Harris has come in and I don't want to usurp her remarks. So, Steve, with your permission, I would like to introduce Dr. Catherine Harris.
I apologize to all of you. We took a grand tour of Lyman Orchards. And so I'm glad that we made it in time. As you know, we are here to commemorate the contribution of the Lyman family and their supporters to the struggle for freedom and human dignity. It's a struggle that continues on to this day. In 1850, the Congress and Senate of the United States passed something called the Fugitive Slave Law. That law required ordinary citizens to support and aid federal marshals when they traveled to try and apprehend escaped enslaved persons. The Lyman family had an abolitionist tradition. Harriet Beecher Stowe, Lyman Beecher, Henry Ward Beecher, they were just a few of them. They prepared a letter and signed it and sent it around to the newspaper. And the letter said that they would not abide by the law. This could have been a federal, in fact it was a federal violation. They took the risk of financial and personal loss because violating that law meant that they could risk a fine of $1,000, also imprisonment up to 6 months. In doing that, they took a stand for freedom and human dignity. In a way, they also set the tone for those individuals who would come generations later, who put up their homes to pay the bail as collateral for civil rights workers. And they paved the way for something that recently happened with regard to the March on Washington. The Amistad Committee sent a bus of students to participate in the march. Again, the continuing struggle for freedom and human dignity. So today we commemorate the Lyman family for their contribution in that struggle, which continues on to this day. And thank you for being so patient.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Harris. Kip Burson with the State of Connecticut, would you like to say a couple words?
We have adopted a new brand for the state, still revolutionary, and I think this family, this house, the Freedom Trail, the Amistad Committee are living that brand. You know, I think people come to Connecticut to make their mark, and they're often inspired by what they see of the marks of their predecessors that are etched into our buildings and onto our landscape. Yet, some of those marks, some of the most important ones, are barely visible. They're there to see if you know where to look, but often you don't. And I think the inspiration of the Freedom Trail is to bring some of the most important marks on our cultural landscape to greater visibility, including the incredible story of this family and this house. And you might summarize that as this, that freedom is not a noun, it's a verb. It's not something that you talk about, it's something that you do. It's a never-ending process. It's not something that you have, it's something that you make every day. And the original abolitionists and their modern-day descendants who are still working to abolish the current scourge of human trafficking know this, that so long as one of us is not free, none of us are free. That's what this family understood. That's what they say to us these number of generations later. And it is our challenge today to continue that cause. So thank you for coming here. This is an incredibly important event that I'm proud to be part of. Thank you.
Thanks very much for those words. John Brayshaw, First Selectman of Middlefield.
First off, let me say thank you for attending. It's an honor to be here. The Lyman family and everything that they do is a source of great pride to the folks of Middlefield and the surrounding area. As the first selectman, part of my duties are the keepers of the cemeteries in town. And there's a cemetery at the north end of town in which is buried 3 African Americans. And we've been trying to find out their name for perhaps 100 years or more. My mother is the head of the Historical Society, And we have 3 African Americans that lived their life in Middlefield, but didn't really have a name when they were buried. So we continue in Middlefield to hold the Lyman family and everything they do. And we appreciate your attendance here. Thank you.
I've been with the Lyman family now for 20 years, and it's really been a pleasure. It's been an honor to work for the family. Everything that's been said is true. What you see is what you get with the Lyman family, and I'm sure that you could say the same thing 100 years ago, 150 years ago. So right now I'd like to introduce John Lyman III. I'll have to say a few words.
Thanks, Steve, and thank you, Dr. Harris, for your words. Thank you, Kip, for coming today and support of the state. Thank you, Al, for your continuation and your spirit, which is so strong. And appreciate that. Todd, thank you for all the work you've done to help bring this together too. And so, good morning. My name is John Lyman, and I'm the member of the 8th generation of Lymans to have been farming the same land in Middlefield since 1741. Steve introduced some of the family members in attendance, and I can speak for the rest who aren't here that they're here in spirit. This is very important to them as well. So on behalf of the whole Lyman family, I am honored to receive this plaque today, which acknowledges the inclusion of the Lyman farm and the Lyman family on the Connecticut Freedom Trail. It's humbling to be included in the prestigious company of individuals who showed great courage during a dark time in our nation's history. I've been asked by some of the media these past few days if the homestead has been part of the Underground Railroad. My answer is I'm not sure. I also point out that being a farm, there were no doubt plenty of barns and outbuildings that might serve that purpose. The nature of the Underground Railroad is that it was clandestine, so we don't know a lot about specific locations. Maybe Diana will help us today. A little pressure. There's more research to be done. And Bill, I appreciate what you're doing with your students and teaching them and doing the research for Underground Railroad research. I think that's great. It's a great way to teach history. So there's more research to be done on the subject. However, what I do know is that this house was home to, and on its walls hang the portraits of 2, quote, farmers and working men, as they stated in their letter to the local newspaper, who publicly stated in a concise and powerful manner a position that stands up as one of the most eloquent statements of what is best about this country, the United States of America. It was 1850, more than 15 years before the issue of slavery forced a bloody civil war that threatened this young country of hope. The principles stated in this letter represent the best of America, still, and when viewed in the context of human history, an experiment even today. The common bond of freedom is what unites all of us. It's no coincidence that this year's corn maze theme is the Statue of Liberty, the icon of American freedom. We hope that visitors to the maze will experience the sense of freedom that we as Americans enjoy, and learn about Ellis Island and how that was the entry port for millions of future Americans, immigrants coming to America for freedom and opportunity. Today, let's celebrate freedom. The Lyman family is honored with this recognition. And my hope is that each of us in this room today can continually find the courage to stand up to freedom as William and David Lyman did 163 years ago. Now I'd like to introduce Middlefield resident.
Durham.
Durham. I'm sorry. Well, you're right there.
On the border.
That's right. And Lyman Orchard's neighbor,
Yes.
Diana McCain. Good job.
Thank you. I was asked just to give some background to, the specifics of this story of the Lymans and what they did and what they risked to do it. So don't worry, this is not a whole notebook. But I did want to get a little bit into the history. As John noticed, We're midway through the 150th anniversary of the Civil War, that indescribably bloody conflict that ultimately resulted in the abolition of slavery. But the fight to liberate blacks and enslaved black men, women, and children began decades before the shooting war started in 1861. Among the earliest and most steadfast of the foot soldiers in that campaign was William Lyman, aided by several members of his family. This is William in the 1840s, so right around the time when he would have been involved in the anti-slavery movement. William Lyman was born in 1783, not far from where we're standing. He lived all but a few years of his life in a house on this spot that his father built in 1785. That house has been moved to make way for this marvelous building, but it still stands over across from the apple barrel. Like his father and his father before him, William Lyman farmed this land. He and his wife, Alma Coe, married and raised 7 children. The national crusade to abolish slavery began in earnest in the early 1830s. Abolitionists condemned slavery as a sin against God, a moral and social evil, and an abomination in a nation founded on the principles of equality and liberty. William Lyman was an early recruit to the fight against slavery. He was one of more than 200 men who met in Hartford in 1838 to form the Connecticut Anti-Slavery Society. He was named one of the 13 managers of the society, and he became an agent for the organization's newspaper, the Charter Oak. Individuals who took part in this kind of activity literally risked their lives. Most Americans, in the North as well as the South, considered abolitionists dangerous fanatics who were willing to do whatever extreme measures were necessary, even the destruction of the Union, to liberate the nation's slaves. The first meeting in 1834 of the Middletown Anti-Slavery Society was broken up by an angry anti-abolitionist crowd that pelted the gathering with stones and eggs and then physically attacked several of the participants. It was probably around this time that William Lyman himself was assaulted by a mob in Durham. The incident didn't deter him. His wife Alma recalled, being a man of principle, he hesitated not to give time and money for this hated cause. By 1840, he was involved in the anti-slavery movement on the national level. At some point, William Lyman moved beyond speaking and organizing to the more immediate, direct, and illegal work of helping fugitive slaves fleeing north on the Underground Railroad. Southern slaveholders grew so angry at the loss of their human property through this network that in 1850, Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Act, which dramatically raised the stakes for those who helped runaways. Dr. Harris said under the new law, the penalty for helping a fugitive slave was a $1,000 fine, 6 months in prison, and civil damages of $1,000 for each runaway somebody assisted. To understand how harsh a punishment this was, consider that in 1850, the total value of the 200 acres William Lyman owned was $8,000. Conviction on a single count of helping a fugitive slave would have cost him a quarter of his land and sent the gentleman at 67 years old to jail. The Fugitive Slave Act also required every citizen, when called upon by authorities, to assist in pursuing and catching a runaway slave. When a fugitive was captured, a local law enforcement official decided if there was enough evidence to send him back to slavery. The accused wasn't even allowed to speak in his own defense. As cruel and unjust as this law sounds, there was powerful support for it in Connecticut and hostility against those who objected to it. At a union meeting in New Haven, more than 2,000 men cheered public officials, business leaders, and clergymen who advocated strict enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Act. One speaker, a former U.S. congressman and future mayor of New Haven, advised anyone who felt unable to obey the new law to, quote, remove themselves to some other country whose institutions they prefer. Basically, love it or leave it. None of this intimidated William Lyman. In fact, it had the opposite effect. Just days after the meeting, William and 5 other residents of Middlefield, including his son David, whose portrait is on the other side of the wall, and his son-in-law, Reverend James Dickinson, published their signed opinion of the Fugitive Slave Act in 2 different Middletown newspapers. It read in part, "When an enactment falsely calling itself law is imposed on us, which disgraces our country, which invades our conscience, which dishonors our religion, which is an outrage upon our sense of justice, we take our stand against the imposition. The Fugitive Slave Law commands us all good citizens to be slave catchers. Good citizens cannot be slave catchers any more than light can be darkness. You tell us the Union will be endangered if we oppose this law. We reply that greater things than the Union will be endangered if we submit to it. Conscience, humanity, self-respect are all greater than the Union, and these must be preserved at all hazards. This presented law commands us to withhold food and raiment and shelter from the most needy. We cannot obey. When our sense of decency is clean gone forever, we will turn slave catchers. Till then, never. Be the consequence what it may, come fines, come imprisonment, come what will, this thing you call law, we will not obey." This was the 19th century equivalent of putting a neon sign on the lawn saying Underground Railroad Station, okay? It took enormous courage to make this statement. We don't know what further involvement William Lyman and his family and neighbors had with the Underground Railroad. Whatever it was, they managed to perform it without being detected, because none of them was ever charged with violating the Fugitive Slave Act. Happily, William Lyman lived to see the triumph of the cause for which he had endangered his reputation, his livelihood, and his very life for more than 30 years. In 1865, the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution abolished slavery forever throughout the United States. And it is in recognition of this selfless dedication to ensuring liberty for all Americans that the Lyman Farm has been added to the Connecticut Freedom Trail. Thank you.
So we'll now formally present to you this plaque designating this place and this story as part of the Freedom Trail. Congratulations.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
Just once again, everybody, thank you for coming today. I know it's important to us here at Lyman, and I know it's important to everybody in attendance. So Tim, Karen, and Todd, great job in putting this together. Yes.
I just wanted to, I'm Grady Faulkner from Middletown, I'm on the Common Council. I just wanted to thank the family on behalf of our folks in Middletown, especially the African Americans who live in Middletown. We have a significant African American population. And this whole trail thing has been phenomenal. It's a great asset. And as the gentleman said, bringing more visibility is what we need to do. When I travel over in Europe, I tell people education is all on the streets, and we need to get into that mode. Education should be everywhere. So I appreciate this homestead in this area being added to the list for people to understand, because that's what we're missing in our communities and in our schools, is people don't know their history. And I hope that this spurs an even larger moment, that it shows that there are people who have been very instrumental in the freedom of African Americans in this country, and they need to be more visible now. And this kind of starts that for me, so that they know that we're not just in this alone, that we do have supporters, and the other side seems to be very, very visible. So I think this is a good thing.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Okay, Tim, do I have anything else to do?
You're good.
I'm all done. Okay, thank you very much for coming.